So as I understand it, what sort of holds this session together is that we're going to be talking about 3 research projects that we've done on the ClimateWise program. And I think hopefully in talking about some of the studies and the findings will sort of prompt some discussion and conversation. I'm a political scientist at CSU, and last semester I taught a graduate course in qualitative research methods. And what I'm going to talk about today is a project that the students did in partnership with the ClimateWise program. The seed for this project came from a conversation I had with Kathy Collier about a year ago, where she was commenting that they collect lots of information on greenhouse gas emissions reductions and cost benefits from ClimateWise partners, but sort of wondering whether there were other things that ClimateWise partners were getting out of participating in the program. Are there sort of intangible benefits that we might be able to sort of get a handle on and you know, I think use to maybe talk about why people might want to be part of the program. And she also was wondering whether we could find, you know, it's possible that by participating in the program, employees in ClimateWise partners were sort of taking home sort of ideas about sustainability and whether the reach was extending through the community. And so I just sort of mentioned that these sounded like things that my students might be able to get at through using qualitative research methods, and thus we got a project. So I'm going to give a very quick primer on qualitative research methods, talk a little bit about what the students did, and then some of our findings. Qualitative research methods, we use qualitative research to sort of get a sense of how things are working in a particular context. So in contrast to quantitative research, where you collect lots and lots of data on lots and lots of cases and use statistical measures to look for general patterns and trends, in qualitative research, we tend to want to understand the experience of people who are involved in a particular program or make particular decisions, sort of understand from their perspective their experience in being involved. So in cooperation with the ClimateWise staff, we decided to do case studies of 4 ClimateWise partners. This was a very purposeful sample. We chose partners where the ClimateWise staff felt like the contact person would be amenable to working with the students. And they also chose partners that had sort of some unique characteristics or were sort of unique in the types of challenges that they faced in implementing the ClimateWise program. So for each of these case studies, we looked both at sort of how they dealt with these unique challenges related to being a small company or a very large company or having multiple sites or being in an energy-intensive industry, for example. And then we also looked at this question of intangible benefits. For confidentiality reasons, I can't tell you who the ClimateWise partners were. So we'll talk in, I'll be talking in sort of very general terms. But they did come from different sectors, were different in terms of their sizes and just sort of their unique makeup. So what the students did, and this is pretty typical of qualitative research, they went out and did interviews. They interviewed the ClimateWise contact person at each of the partners, as well as some employees where possible. And so it was anywhere between about 4 to 6 interviews per partner. The students also spent at least an hour at the partner, sort of just observing the culture, the operation, sort of what they're doing. There's all kinds of limitations with this project. First and foremost, this was about giving the students some practical experience, doing interviews, analyzing interview data, sort of doing qualitative research. We did not, if we were to really design a project to really answer these questions, we would want to look at more partners, interview more people, look at other types of data. So, what I have is our goal, and we had a common agreement with ClimateWise, that the goal was really to give students the experience, and if we found something interesting along the way, that would be a successful project. So 4 themes sort of emerged when we were looking at the interview data and the observational data in terms of how ClimateWise partners talked about participation and the types of things that they were getting from participation. One was about the importance of networking and information sharing. So we heard a lot about how people really liked interacting with other ClimateWise partners, getting new ideas, particularly working with other people in their sector and learning about things that they could do in their own businesses and help in implementing programs. So that was a really important benefit. And I think that's one that's sort of already on the radar screen for the ClimateWise staff. We also heard people talk about community building, and they talked about it in 2 different ways. One was sort of an external community building, and so they talked about how they really liked meeting and learning about other organizations and other companies in the community. And so one company talked about how they've started using more local products and services as a result of interacting with other ClimateWise partners. We also heard an interesting story about sort of internal community building around ClimateWise. And so one of the partners that we met with talked about how ClimateWise and broader issues of sustainability were sort of this rallying point that they used to really build relationships with their customers, and that it created this sort of common sense of community. You know, when people would come into their business, there was sort of this shared sort of culture that they had, and ClimateWise was part of building that, which was really interesting. People also talked about the importance of recognition for the actions that they're taking. So people valued the NPR sponsorship, you know, the daily programming on KUNC. They said that they found that raised their visibility in the region, particularly among other organizations in their sector. So those were really, and these were really sort of things that came out of talking to the contact point in each of the businesses that we met with. We also wanted to explore this question of employee engagement. How is climate-wide participation sort of filtering through the organizations? How are employees sort of engaging with the program? What are they sort of taking away from it? And is that having sort of other spillover effects we might think about in the community? And here we found a pretty wide variation in terms of how aware employees were of the program. And we sort of came up with two models that we saw in terms of how the ClimateWise contact point in the organization was interacting with the employees. One was, I think, what we called the lone wolf model. And this was a model where the contact person took sort of sole responsibility for reporting, for implementing challenges. And the employees kind of knew ClimateWise was something that their company was involved in, but it was really associated with that individual. So that's, oh yeah, that's that thing that Joe does. Or yeah, that's, I know Mary is really involved in that and goes to the meetings. But they didn't really make connections between, a bicycle challenge that they may have participated in and the sort of larger effort of sustainability or anything else. It was just kind of, this is something I do because somebody at work told me I needed to do this, but it's their thing. It's not anything that I'm really taking ownership over. The other model was sort of an integrator model. And here what we found was that ClimateWise was sort of part, again, of a broader culture of sustainability in the organization. And so even if employees weren't fully aware of exactly what ClimateWise was trying to do and exactly what it meant to be a platinum member or a gold member, they saw ClimateWise as sort of part of this broader system of sustainability, and it was part of their culture. It's part of something that they really liked about being part of this organization. And here, rather than thinking about ClimateWise as something that sort of helps employees rethink or get new ideas about sustainability, ClimateWise was really something that built on values that were already present in the organization. So these are organizations where people come to them and are attracted to them because they already hold sustainability values. So ClimateWise doesn't necessarily seem to change what people are doing, but maybe allows them to build on it further and, again, get recognition in the community for what they're doing. But across the board, I would say we found sort of a mismatch that employees in general could use more information about the ClimateWise program and understanding what they're doing. So I actually don't need it because this is my last slide. And we met with the ClimateWise staff with these findings, and I think again they're not, we can't definitively make any broad claims, but I think they raise some issues for discussion in terms of thinking what people get from the ClimateWise program and whether and how it's important to reach out to employees. So thank you.
My name's John, and this is my co-author, Samantha Mosier, and we are both graduate students also in the Department of Political Science at Colorado State. And when they asked us to do this, they did not tell me I'd have to almost undress. But anyway, it's wonderful to be here, and we are looking forward to kind of sharing our findings with you. We looked at it from more of an internal point of view. What does ClimateWise as an organization be able to do? It's been around for 10 years now. So we wanted to look again at kind of a organizational wide, what have been its goals and what have been its, has it achieved those goals? So we grounded our study in the voluntary environmental programming literature. And this is kind of a second generation look at environmental policies. So it's gearing away from the top-down command and control that was kind of prevalent in the 1970s. So again, this is getting at more of these flexible arrangements, these voluntary programs. We looked at just climate-wise, so it's a single case study. It's exploratory. The voluntary environmental programming literature kind of focuses on national and international and even regional levels, but it doesn't really focus and it hasn't really explored a whole lot of what's going on at the local level. So we looked at it again, just at one study, and we tried to kind of identify some of the internal and external variables that have hindered or helped or facilitated climate-wise successes and some of its challenges that it's encountered along the way. So why Fort Collins and why climate-wise? Well, first, we're here, so there was kind of a logistical consideration, but also it's optimal demographics for environmental programming. It has, as you can see, it's wealthier and more well-educated than the bulk of the state and certainly the country. But it also has some unique attributes or characteristics at the city level. Budgeting for outcomes is an interesting program that requires climate-wise to compete with other environmental programs for money and resources. It operates a municipal utility, and so that's also interesting because the municipal utility and climate-wise are both answerable to the same governing body. That's a little different than what goes on in other kind of environmental programs, such as EPA's WasteWise or other kinds of certification programs or voluntary programs. And again, as you might be aware, it's a modified council manager, so that there's a council that decides policy, but also a manager that's an expertise and a generalist in implementing that policy. So what did we learn when we started kind of uncovering and investigating climate-wise? Well, it's actually one of many voluntary programs offered by the city and by the municipal utility department. There's a number of programs that work to disseminate information, that work to encourage alternative forms of transportation, but climate-wise is a bit unique in that it helps to facilitate actual environmental benefits instead of just disseminating information. So its mission, and this is kind of all over its website, and we think it was a good guiding principle, is to help local businesses reduce their carbon emissions and costs by providing recommendations and ongoing support. So implicit in that mission are two kind of goals, and that is one, environmental sustainability, and one, economic benefits. So that's kind of the frame we were looking at. Can we measure, has climate-wise achieved those goals? Prior to doing that, we thought it would be important to just kind of see where climate-wise has started and how it's evolved into what it is today. So in 2000, most of you probably wouldn't have been here because it only had 13 partners and it didn't even have one full-time equivalent employee. It only received funding from ICLEI, which is an international network of climate change activists. And today it has over 270 partners, 4 full-time staff, and it's funded by the general fund, utilities, and grants. So it's really been able to leverage its resources, increase its organizational capacity to, again, meet some of its goals, but also respond to challenges. While looking at this, we saw the 2005 Advisory Committee as a key point in time. Despite the table not looking exactly right, what that is basically the Advisory Committee identified it had 5 different levels. And what we did, looked at those 3, because those 3 are what actually, when you're a platinum, gold, or silver member, you actually have to complete a project. And so, as you can see, the number of firms actually completing a project each year has continually increased. And why does this matter? Is because it helps climate-wise get around some of the concerns about greenwashing and free riding. And so you're not just a climate-wise member, receiving benefits of recognition. You're actually a climate-wise member that's achieving a project each year. And so program results, we separated this into long-term and short-term, and we thought both were important to assessing whether climate-wise is meeting its goals. And long-term, it seemingly has met its goals. In their latest annual report, it's reduced greenhouse gases, partners have, by about 136,000 tons, and saved partners about $39 million. And short term, we've also see that the program has actually set its own short-term goals, and both times it's met those. So that's also a good sign, because a lot of the literature about voluntary environmental programs has these programs failing to meet their actual goals. So resources. Okay. So along the way, we identified a number of challenges, or climate-wise identified a number of challenges, and then also some of the strategies they adopted to actually kind of work to overcome those strategies. The first was resources, which I'm sure you can all appreciate. At some points in times, they didn't have all the resources that they wanted. That could be the organizational capacity, the staffing, and sometimes they didn't have the technical expertise to be able to demonstrate success. So even if they had the staff, they didn't have the ability to track how many tons of greenhouse gases that they were actually saving. It's also been a challenge to continuously engage partners, and some of the strategies that they've kind of implemented to help overcome that is they've maintained constant contact. So they host events like this, they work with partners, they contact them every year. There's also different advisory committees that allow them to receive input and program direction from partners. And again, they hold events for networking and sharing information. And they've also had some concerns about greenwashing, and this is more coming from the academic literature. But what greenwashing, again, is this kind of idea that firms may free ride and enjoy benefits without actually achieving anything. And so this is where the partnership levels came in. And again, if you're a platinum, gold, or silver, you have to report actually completing a project each year. And importantly, they do use a third-party verification system for project evaluations. So there's really no way that ClimateWise can increase their numbers or fudge the numbers or anything like that. So that also helps. Conclusions, and this is kind of where we spend a lot of our time. We actually first presented this to cities and officials down in New Orleans. So this might be a little bit more applicable to them, but we think it's also good to keep in mind for any organization. You want to reach your goals, both short and long term. And in terms of key factors, momentum and capacity are necessary. And we saw momentum in the fact that ClimateWise emerged after a long series of environmental activism by the city. And that could just be its climate action plan, its recycling, its other voluntary environmental programs. So it emerged after the city had actually decided that environmental sustainability was a priority. Grants may be critical for survival, but you can't rely on them. And so as you can see, ClimateWise has been very successful in kind of leveraging its resources. And so now if one funding source gets cut or goes away, they have other sources to fall back on. They can attract a variety of participants. As Dr. Betzel said, there's a host of different firms that we interviewed, but it's also, you have single-person firms, you have firms with thousands of employees in both the private and public sectors. This is one of the challenges that we faced, and it's kind of endemic to all voluntary environmental programs, is the ability to track key data and be able to demonstrate effectiveness. So what is causing this? What is causing this event to happen? And can you single that out and kind of isolate causality? And then frame program to fit your community. And this can be also applied to organizations. You want to frame ClimateWise in a way that's going to be amenable to not only your organization, but your customers. And for our own future objectives, so research objectives, you might be hearing from us. I'm not sure if that's a good thing from your point of view, but why did you join is an interesting question, and a lot of times is researched in the VEP literature. And then also important is why are you staying, and why are you going from maybe a gold to platinum or platinum to bronze? Certainly there's some interesting things that could be kind of teased out from that. What caused some years to be more successful? In looking at when partners joined, there was a big spike from about 2007 to 2009. And we're not sure why that occurred. That'd be another interesting way to study. And then how much did ClimateWise impact environmental gains compared to other factors? So is it more the fact that your organization joined ISO 14001 that spurred environmental sustainability, or is it that you joined ClimateWise? And then more broadly, looking at the voluntary environmental program literature, we want to look at some additional cases. So how important is it to have the municipal utility on board and where it can coordinate with ClimateWise, or the voluntary environmental program. So looking at some of those factors, other states, is Fort Collins kind of just a unique best practices or best case scenario? Or is there other programs out there that might be in regions that are less environmentally conscious to begin with? So anyway, we'll look forward to your questions, and thank you.
All right, thanks, Matt. And again, we're kind of linked together research projects had to do with ClimateWise. I think, we both, Michelle and both I had a kind of random conversation with Kathy Collier. It's like, that's really great. We should work together on something. So again, I'm looking at cost and benefits of different community alternatives that ClimateWise promotes. And so just, again, the Southwest Energy Efficiency Project, SWEEP, as you might guess from our name, we work on energy efficiency in the Southwest. We have a couple of different sectors. Transportation is where I work, but we have utilities, buildings, industrial efficiency, and we're based in Boulder. So again, we're kind of got this idea well, let's look at kind of a real cost benefit analysis from an employee and also employer perspective on these different kind of commuting alternatives that ClimateWise is trying to promote among their partners. So I ended up just focusing on 4 of them, kind of encouraging transit, biking, carpooling, and teleworking. So what can employers do to encourage their employees to get to work in these ways, and kind of what are the bottom line impacts of these different alternatives? So I think it's pretty clear, mostly clear, that for the employee, there's definitely a benefit. If you're not driving your single occupancy vehicle every day, you're obviously saving gasoline. You also are saving things you call indirect costs, things like costs for operation and maintenance on your vehicle, depreciation of your vehicle. Every mile you put on your vehicle, you're essentially losing money in the vehicle. So the estimate I come up with for kind of average for Fort Collins is the average daily commute is costing you about $8 a day. So if you kind of extrapolate that out for, if you do it 1 day a year, every 1 day a week for the whole year, it's about $400 savings. 3 days a week for the year, about $1,100. And over essentially full time, you're saving about $2,000. So that was okay, that's great, but I think people generally have an idea that employers providing or supporting commuting alternatives, they do that as a benefit for their employees to make them kind of a more attractive firm in many ways. But what we were really interested in trying to look at is coming at it from the employer's perspective to try to better understand what's their bottom line impact of this. And so that's kind of what I dug into for this research. And I looked at those 4 different areas of commuting alternatives that I showed up there. I'm just going to talk about 2 here today for, just for time purposes, and also these 2 happen to kind of have the best results for the employer. So started out looking, okay, if you're an employer and you want to support your employees biking to work as an alternative to driving their vehicle. So I've kind of here just have some of the costs and benefits. And generally what I've tried to do is I've really tried to be kind of liberal with the cost and kind of more conservative with the benefits. I'm really, it'd be very easy to kind of take the most outlandish claims for benefits and say, oh, this is a slam dunk. There's a lot of different claims out there. If you go to, different organizations are going to promote different research and different studies. So I really tried to focus in on kind of more academic or government type of studies that are not coming from, the American Cycling Association. So we kind of have trying to get more objective sources of data. So again, starting out with the cost on the top here. So if you're supporting your employees, they're going to need to have some place to put their bike when they get to work. So in some cases, that might even be free. They might have a space in their office that no one's using. They can just stick their bike there. Doesn't cost anything. Might have to or might want to install a bike rack outside of the workplace. That's kind of where you get the $200. And then you can go as far as a bike storage locker, which is kind of a much more secure thing, for about $1,000. And then you also kind of have to think about what I, for better lack of term, called post-ride cleanup options. If an employee gets to work and they've, sweating, they want to figure out a way they can smell nice when they walk into their office, and everyone else is going to appreciate that too. So there's a couple different ways you could support that. If there's a gym or a health club nearby, you could subsidize part of an employee's membership for that, so they could go shower there. Or you could even go as far as this $13,000 is the cost of having like a shower installed on site at the workplace. So you can see you can have a pretty broad range of cost from this, and just really depends on the situation of the employer. And then again, these are the kind of benefits that I tried to quantify as much as possible. So I looked at studies that said employees who are cycling to work, or especially doing the kind of exercise, regular exercise, have reduced absenteeism, increased productivity, and I think most important for lots of employers, you can actually have kind of reduced healthcare cost for that employee. So adding these three up, and I'm not going to go into this potential benefits here right now, you get about $4,800 in benefits versus your cost here. And so just kind of from a very simple payback chart kind of showing, well, what does that mean? So in the high cost scenario, you are going to have a payback period. You're going to start just over $13,000 in initial cost, but your annual benefits are going to come out to just under $5,000. So you're looking at a payback period of about 3 years. And this is also, it's very important to keep in mind, this is essentially for one full-time equivalent employee. So the really nice thing about the biking is that those costs, like these costs, generally are going to be fairly, or not going to like increase exponentially as you add more employees. Like having a bike rack out front is going to serve maybe 2 to 4 employees. So that one cost of $200 is going to be the same for 1 employee or 4 employees. And that kind of goes the same for like the shower option. So those costs don't scale up in the same way as you add a new employee. You're not going to double or triple your cost. But the benefits do scale up in that way. So as you're adding more employees, your benefits should be increasing greater than your costs are increasing. So again, you have a payback period about 3 years, after which you'll have annual benefits about $5,000. And then for kind of that low cost scenario, you have almost instantaneous payback period and then about $4,500 in annual benefits. The other commuting alternative I want to talk about was telecommuting. And there's a great talk earlier from another presenter who did a lot about kind of the workplace environment, how that's changing, and how teleworking and people not working in the main office is coming more and more of a trend. So this is kind of a little tougher to generalize. I've tried to make a general case to kind of give employers a perspective of what's the general direction of the cost and benefits. For teleworking, I think every employer is really going to have to look closely at their own numbers, their own situation to see if this is going to work for them and what their real costs are going to be for having employees working from home or working from remote locations. So, I mean, some of the costs identified are just kind of, you have to have someone administer the program. You need to have training so the employees kind of have a better idea of what's expected from them working at home. Setting up phone lines, fax lines, buying computers, printers, maybe a desk. These are pretty variable. If you have someone working from home 1 day a week, they probably might not need a new desk or a whole new office setup. They might even already have a laptop they can take back and forth. So these equipment costs could be, I think, anywhere from $0 to up to $4,000. So I've assumed $4,000 for the cost benefit here. So you have like initial upfront cost, about $5,000, and then some annual recurring costs, paying for phone lines, paying for continuing administration. And then again, I looked into the literature on the benefits of teleworking. And again, on general, a lot of research out there has shown that there is the potential of, there is going to be increased productivity. People do tend, on general, to work, can be more productive at home. There's kind of reduced absenteeism, and that you have kind of less fake sick days that people take because they have that additional flexibility in their work day and their work week. And then it's really something that employees value, that flexibility, and it does encourage employees to stay with firms over the longer period of time, so you have less new, if you have to hire someone, there's obviously a pretty large cost involved in training someone and getting them up to speed. A benefit that I've not talked about is the value of reduced office space, and I kind of call that a potential long-term benefit because it's not something that's going to necessarily be realized immediately by the company, but again, if you have a situation where you actually are reducing, if you have some people working 2 days a week at home, other people working 3 days a week, they maybe share that working space when they come into the office. So they're kind of reducing the actual amount of office space you need for employees. So while that might not make a financial interest difference right away, if down the line you're moving your office, you're restructuring things, you're thinking about expanding the workplace, you can actually, you now need maybe 100, 200 square feet less of office space. So that's a consideration you can take into account when you're looking for a new office space, and that actually can reduce your cost over time. And so again, kind of a simple payback period is for this one, about 2 years, and then you have annual benefits of about $2,600. And then I just wanted to touch on one thing, another element that is important and is one of those long-term potential benefits I talked about along with office space is the value of parking. For most employees in Fort Collins, parking is free, but someone is obviously bearing that cost. Whether you're the employer and you're leasing the space, you're paying for that parking lot as part of your lease, or if you own the area, you're paying for that parking lot. So that's a cost that employees don't necessarily see, but it is being borne by the employer. An estimate from Fort Collins I've seen is that one parking space to be built costs between $2,000 and $5,000, and then there's annual operation and maintenance costs about $75 to $200. So again, it's kind of a long-term benefit in that if you're an employer, and again, if you're thinking like, okay, maybe I want to expand my workforce, and now I have to all of a sudden think about building more parking spaces. If you have people who are taking transit and carpooling and teleworking and all those different things are going to reduce your demand for on-site parking. So maybe you don't need to build more parking spaces. Or maybe when you're again down the road thinking like, oh, maybe we're going to need to move our office for whatever reason, you can again look at offices, and one of the variables you can consider is that you actually need less parking space, and so you can actually start paying less for the amount of parking that's in your new office lease. So those are kind of just the general findings from my research, and if any more questions, I'm happy. I have lots of more detail about all the stuff I've done and happy to share that with anyone. So thank you very much.